Hello, friends. So, I wanted to talk to you today about ducks. Ducks have this amazing capacity of being resilient because when there is something that happens that's traumatic or fearful, what they do is that they shake it off. They shake it off and then they leave. They move on. They do something else. We see this easily in a river. Two ducks that meet and then start to kind of get into one of those fights, fight or flight mode. And once they're done with their thing, they usually turn the other way or they move aside each other. And then you see them shake it off and then they continue. And basically, what that happens is that they're shaking the trauma, the overload of charge off them. And we don't really have the capacity to do so. So we carry the trauma with us instead throughout life. Um, it is true, though, that we have the possibility to do this exact same thing. We could say that where our focus goes, our energy flows. And how can we learn to do like the duck, to be like the duck? How can I develop actually a more resilient way of being? So, um, here are my thoughts that I've written down around that subject. The difficulty is that we create a narrative around what happened. Okay, so basically, we're creating a logic to ourselves to make sense of it, and then it enters our life story. And which is why, first of all, it's so easy to have it stick with us, and then also why it's so hard to get rid of it. We all experience trauma, more or less, let's say, traumatizing, more or less big. But I could even say that birth itself is a traumatic experience that we have, the first one. What it is that it's something that happens as life flows fluidly and leaves a trace. It's a rupture in the life flow that leaves a trace and it alters us. And so it crystallizes us. In a certain way, we can say that the way that we are shaped, this whole you are the sum of all your past experiences, is a lot of situations that we encounter over life that then creates this crystallized being that we are. And the more we become blocked, the harder life finds its way through and to just flow through it. And so it hardens us, of course, because we create, not only it hardens us because we get blocked in there, so it's hard, but it also hardens us because it's actually pain happening. And since we don't want to suffer, what we try to do is that we try to control the painful part or situation by blocking it. And that's why we become hard. So it's like we're building up this wall, right? And the more we experience trauma, that gets stuck in the body, the stiffer we become and the less life flows through us. And so we create this armor around us, like this space suit that will then keep us at a distance with everything else around us. As a parenthesis to this is also one of the reasons that when we start to practice, for instance, things like yoga, and we begin to open up our body again, we have things that comes to the surface and we start to feel things, and memories coming back, etc. It's very much linked to this because we're opening up where the trauma has come in and blocked and crystallized us. So the reason that the duck finds it so easy to just shake it off is because it doesn't create a narrative around it. It doesn't become its identity. It doesn't become who they are and how they define themselves. And for you, obviously, as a human being, with that very good capacity of the prefrontal cortex and our consciousness and our narrative and the memory and all of that, it's hard for us to do the same thing because we make sense of it. We use our logic reasoning. But as I said earlier, where your focus goes, your energy also flows. So it means that the more you push towards something, the less that force can be given to something else, of course. Where your focus goes, your energy flows, and not somewhere else. So the longer you stay on this, the more you will actually bring all your energy in it, and the more it will actually drain you in other things. So the more you focus on the driver that stole your spot at the parking, or the longer you stay annoyed with the person who blamed you for whatever it was, the harder it's going to be for you to come back to an open state of enjoying the sunshine, for instance. And because all your energy is focused on this traumatic experience, the harder you try to please your mother, um, the less you will manage to actually liberate yourself from her judgment, whether it's a true one or if it's in your imagination. Um, by sticking to what happened as well, you don't allow for that natural flow of life to happen, you see. So basically, the more you stick on that, the more you, you're resisting, right? Because if you're sticking to it, if you stay on it, what are you doing? You're not moving forward. And if you're not moving forward, then there's only one thing that you do, and that's resisting the natural moving forward progression of time, because life is actually progression. It moves constantly. It is never still. It is just you resisting it. Just imagine yourself in a river, in a boat, and you can either go downstream or upstream. And if you actually try to go upstream, so against it, what happens? Usually not much. You're getting extremely tired by trying to move, and you're actually not really getting anywhere because you're resisting the flow of nature. So, it's easy to just feel it yourself, because what I was just explaining to you, you can recognize this when you go with the flow, when you go with the river, everything goes easy. It's ease, it's synchronicity, it's things happening one after the other. It's this thing that we say that we're aligned, right? And when we're not, well, it feels like blockages, it feels like stuckness, it feels like I can't think of anything else. On this, we've all had that. It's as simple as the text message that we're not receiving. We're blocked on it. We're focusing only on that. Nothing else happens. It's actually the same thing. It's a question of resistance to the natural flow of life. And the duck doesn't have this resistance. So anything in nature is just like the duck, except for us. So you can see it. Look at the tree that follows the line of the mountain as it grows. Look at the flowers who turn their heads again towards the sun, not against, towards the sun as the sun passes the dead, the sunflowers. Everything in nature has just this flow where it goes with it, except for us. So obviously, if we could, we would shake it off. And what I mentioned earlier, this is what, for instance, yoga can kind of help us with, or dancing. There's a reason it's very therapeutical actually to dance. It's because we're shaking it off, we're letting it out. And what we also do, especially if you do it to some kind of music that we very much enjoy, is that we're allowing ourselves to jump onto that vibe, right? The good vibe. What that means is that we allow for ourselves to come back to a frequency of a higher vibration that feels good, which is one of flow, which is one of ease, instead of sticking on focusing on that thing. Why did he say that? Why did he steal my parking spot? And then we're resisting, we stay blocked, and we're not allowing for ourselves to achieve or to float up to the frequency. Okay, so what do we do? How do we do like the duck? What's the way? What we needed to really focus on is that flow that we're going to get back into. So our best way is to find something in our surroundings that will help us to come back to that sensation of the ease. to come back into the flow of nature. So what that means is that when this happens, if I can turn my attention towards, for instance, the beautiful sunlight instead of the angry driver, and then focus on that beautiful sunlight that will bring me back, that will make me forget a little bit actually what I was focusing on and bring me back, then all of a sudden I find ease again. And then it becomes much easier to deal with the situation. You know this. Take an example of two people fighting. Have you ever been in a fight with someone and then a surprising element comes in that kind of throws you off guard, and in best case scenario might even make both of you laugh, and then you kind of forget what the fight was about? Okay, it's the same thing actually, except for there you have the element of surprise coming in, which is very helpful in changing our direction. When you have to do it yourself, it's more difficult because it's a conscious willpower kind of movement happening. So you need to stay a little bit longer focused on the surprising element or the sunshine, for instance. I hope I'm making myself clear here. It's easy, of course, with something that doesn't affect us too much. Like, for instance, someone stealing my parking spot. It's more difficult to do naturally with more touchy situations when it comes to the relationships that we have with people. And when it feels like it's touching our ego identity. Don't get me wrong, for some people who have a very fragile sense of I, the driver stealing my parking spot can be an extremely difficult, touchy thing to get over, actually. You might laugh, we'll see when you're in the situation. It happens more often than we think. All right, so when we direct our attention then away from what consumes us, we become more resilient because we stay strong in the mood that we want to be in. Or if you want to use those more kind of new agey ways, we stay in our vibration. It's actually one of the hardest things. We can be in such a good mood, waking up, doing our thing, everything's working fine. We walk out of our house and then bam, something happens and we're thrown off very quickly, and then we're wobbly, right? And then all of a sudden everything just goes wrong. So it's actually a very difficult thing to do, to stay strong in your vibration, to be like, I'm going to stay with this. Actually, that whole thing is a little bit what they love to call boundaries, developing your own preferences and being able to be like, I'm going to stay within my boundaries of this vibrating situation that I want to be in and not let yours affect me. So that, not so I can detach from you, but so that I can actually deal with you coming from a much more joyful place, which is more constructive for you and definitely more comfortable for me as well. So the more we can stay in our own home, in our own body, in our own frequency, in our own consciousness, then the easier it becomes also to not let just my ego then react and lash out to something. And I actually will not be so resisting, if you see what I mean. I stay in the flow, I can encounter a situation, and I don't let it become a trauma. Using the word trauma here in the sense, a very light sense, obviously, compared to what we usually mean when we talk about trauma. I'm talking about the disruption of the natural flow. Okay, so this is a very simple way to develop resilience in your day-to-day life. When it comes to the deep wounding, the traumas that have been crystallized since a long time in our bodies, it is fully a part of our subconscious mind, and therefore much more part of our identity, which makes it much more difficult to just shake it off or to just look at the sunshine. This is the reason why sometimes when we try to go into the new agey stuff with old trauma, old baggage that we have with us, it just feels really fake to say positive affirmation if we, feels like that's so not true. And so I'm saying it, but it just feels inauthentic. That's why, because it's not as easy as just shaking it off. It is something that we need to then nurture in a very different way, and we'll talk about that in another video. And of course, the main goal, kind of the self-image course that I have online, the self-image project, is to be able to undo the knots in ourselves so that we can find that free flowing fluidity of life that is so natural actually to us originally. All right, that was it. Have a lovely day.